You ever wonder how massive, world-altering political events actually trickle down and, well, totally shatter everyday lives? Today, we are diving deep into this explainer of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's monumental novel, Half of a Yellow Sun. We're going to be navigating the brutal realities of the Nigerian Civil War. It's a space where artificial borders and heavy colonial legacies crash right into these incredibly deep human stories of love, betrayal, and ultimately survival. Now, to truly get a grip on this story, we've got to start with a really provocative realization from one of the main characters, Richard. He totally hits the nail on the head regarding the root cause of the conflict. The source material makes it super clear that the violence we're about to see, it wasn't the product of some age-old hatred, like the foreign papers kept claiming back then. Instead, it traces the friction directly back to the very structures set up by the British Empire. So to understand the war, we have to look at Biafra itself. We're talking about an independent republic born out of pure desperation and out of the arbitrary colonial borders of Nigeria that literally forced over 300 different cultural groups together. Think about that. The British basically lumped together incredibly diverse peoples, primarily the Hausa in the north, the Yoruba in the southwest, and the Igbo in the southeast. They essentially built a massive geopolitical powder keg. And, that powder keg absolutely didn't ignite overnight. We see this rapid, just heartbreaking shift starting from a really hopeful, newly independent Nigeria in 1960. But then it spirals into horrific ethnic pogroms by 1966, leading to the ultimate secession of Biafra in 1967. All that early hope of independence soured incredibly fast. It led to massacres of the Igbo people, which acted as the direct spark for them breaking away to try and form their own nation. The massive scale of the resulting war was, well, it's almost impossible to overstate. Over 1 million civilian deaths. 1 million. As the Nigerian government fought to annex Biafra, they used absolutely devastating tactics. We're talking forced starvation and heavy blockades, all while being aided by arms from Britain and Russia. The sheer scale of human suffering packed into those 3 years is just astronomical. But let's be real, statistics like that, they're almost impossible for our brains to truly comprehend. And that is exactly why Adichie is so brilliant here. She gives these astronomical numbers a human face. We get to zoom in on an intersecting cast of wildly diverse characters navigating this chaotic landscape. So instead of just reading dry history, we're experiencing the war through the eyes of people whose daily routines, romances, and petty arguments are literally derailed by history unfolding right outside their front doors. Right off the bat, we're hit with these stark class divides. Just look at the contrast between the wealthy, London-educated Alana and Ugwu. Ugwu is this young boy from a rural bush village who comes to the city to cook and clean. He is completely dazzled by modern appliances and all these fiery intellectual debates happening in the living room, while Alana represents the ultra-polished, new Nigerian elite. It's a contrast that perfectly highlights the massive inequalities bubbling inside the country way before the war even starts. We also get these fascinating, deep cultural contrasts. On one hand, you have Odenigbo. He's a fiercely patriotic Igbo intellectual hosting these intense, radical political salons. And on the other, there's Richard. Richard's a shy British expat who is desperately longing to belong to a cause that, frankly, isn't truly his. He's deeply in love with Alana's twin sister, Kainanen, and it's almost like through her, he falls completely in love with the very idea of Biafra. Odenigbo's sheer frustration with post-colonial Nigeria is captured so perfectly in this one piece of advice he gives his houseboy, Ugwu. He basically tells him, look, you need to learn the real history of your people, but for the exam, write down the colonial version. It's a wildly pragmatic but tragic approach. It really shows how the heavy shadow of the empire is still dictating their everyday lives and their entire education system. And remember, these tensions we're seeing, absolutely not an accident. They were the direct, calculated result of British divide and rule tactics. They purposefully stoked ethnic division to just maintain their influence from afar. By structuring the government to heavily favor the autocratic northern Hausa, while the Igbo and Yoruba built up the strong middle class, the colonizers essentially guaranteed internal friction. It was a strategy to make the entire nation way easier to manage from a distance. Okay, so then the tipping point hits. All those comfortable, brandy-fueled academic debates of peacetime, they are suddenly and violently shattered. Everything flips upside down in an instant when the Biafran War officially erupts. Our core characters are forced to just drop everything, fleeing their cozy university town lives to become desperate refugees as the violence breaks out and the Nigerian army starts closing in.
At first, though, when Biafra secedes, there is this immense wave of joy. The characters are completely swapped up, rallying behind the brand new flag where the half of a yellow sun symbolizes this incredibly glorious, optimistic future. Odenigbo is out there proudly waving it, declaring that they're finally going to be secure and lead Black Africa. It's this intensely intoxicating, lightning in a bottle moment of hope for true self-determination.
But tragically, and you can see this coming, that intoxicating optimism is just swiftly, brutally crushed by the casual cruelty of a new world. We watch these vibrant, hopeful characters transform into starving refugees, fighting off horrible diseases like kwashiorkor. It's devastating. You see a brilliant poet literally having to trade his pen for a rifle. And Ugwu, he gets forcefully conscripted into an army that has completely lost its moral compass, ending up committing the exact same atrocities they set out to fight against.
Now, what makes this whole narrative absolutely brilliant is how Adichie mirrors the massive political betrayal of the nation with these deeply, deeply personal betrayals between our core characters. It's like the grand historical narrative of secession and fractured alliances is literally playing out right inside the bedrooms and living rooms of Olana, Odenigbo, Kainan, and Richard. When we look at all these intertwining affairs, it's essentially a perfect microcosm for the Nigerian conflict itself. Just as the country is literally tearing itself apart, Alana sleeps with Richard in this moment of vengeful, blinding grief after finding out about Odenigbo's affair. Then Kainene burns Richard's manuscript in pure retaliation. It is a total mess. Yet, amazingly, through the absolutely brutal crucible of the war, they all somehow find a path to this intense, albeit heavily scarred, forgiveness. It ultimately leads to surprisingly stronger loyalties.
These messy interpersonal tensions also force us to zoom out and confront the huge overarching themes of race and culture, especially when we look at Richard. He's constantly navigating the echoes of empire. He absolutely detests the casual, everyday racism of his fellow white expats who view Africans as uncivilized, and he is trying so hard to be a true ally to the Biafran cause. You really see Richard's genuine fascination with Nigeria anchored by his absolute obsession with the 9th century roped pots of the Igbo Ukwu. For him, Africa is definitely not some blank slate just waiting for European civilization. Not at all. He sees it through the lens of these magnificent, incredibly intricate ancient artifacts that speak to a rich, deeply established heritage. Because, think about it, these ancient artifacts literally prove that a highly complex, magnificent culture was thriving, completely independent of any European influence. It totally shatters the racist propaganda the colonizers were spreading. When Richard tries to talk to his fellow expats about this native metalworking, they just brush him off, assuming he only wants to exploit the art for a quick buck. But to Richard, those pots are undeniable proof of a brilliant, uncolonized African identity. Ultimately, though, Richard has to face a really harsh, unavoidable reality check, which gets delivered point blank by a Biafran officer. He basically tells him, look, your government will evacuate you in a minute if you ask them to. It highlights his white privilege. It's the safety net that the people he loves so dearly simply do not have. Sure, he can write about it, he can advocate all he wants, but at the end of the day, his passport guarantees him a way out of a nightmare that is totally inescapable for his new family. Yet, even amidst all this absolute ruin, despite the horrors of war and the suffocating legacy of imperialism, the true core heartbeat of this explainer is the profound, enduring power of love. Love that is tested to its absolute limits. Whether we're talking about the fractured but unyielding bond between twin sisters Alana and Kainene, or the incredibly flawed romantic love that somehow manages to survive starvation and air raids, humanity just persists. The resolution of our story brings, frankly, unspeakable tragedy. I mean, Kainene's mysterious disappearance while she's out searching for food across enemy lines is gut-wrenching. But there is also incredible resilience. In a beautiful twist, it's actually Ugwu, the former houseboy who was so traumatized by the war, who heals by becoming a writer. He's the one who ends up writing the very history book referenced throughout the narrative, "The world was silent when we died." So we're left deeply pondering this massive central symbol, the half of a yellow sun. Was it representing a rising sun of glorious hope, or was it always just an incomplete dream, completely doomed by history? The Biafran flag itself carries this heavy duality. It stands for incredible resilience and a burning desire for self-determination, for sure. But its incompleteness perfectly, tragically, mirrors the unfulfilled promise of the Republic itself. Which leaves us with a really lingering, powerful question to chew on. When history is so often written by the victors, and when the world remains completely silent as a whole nation dies, Whose responsibility is it to preserve the truth of that half of a yellow sun? Because history isn't just about dates and treaties, right? It's about the people who actually survived to write it down. Keep thinking about how the macro shapes your own micro, and we'll catch you in the next one.